That's what I thought. So serotonin is another major neurotransmitter. I mean, we just talked about sort of three major neurotransmitters, right? Dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Talk about serotonin. Next week we'll talk GABA and glutamate. That'll be exciting. So what do we need to know about serotonin? It's really sort of a two-step process. It's made from tryptophan. It's made from that amino acid. Tryptophan hydroxylase, you might have heard of something similar. Who remembers tyrosine hydroxylase? We talked about that like an hour ago, right? Basically, you're going to take tryptophan and you're going to convert it into this giant long name here, right, that you probably don't need to know. It's 5-hydroxytryptophan.
Is that the turkey thing? You don't know about
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay, I just didn't know. Why do I know that name?
Tryptophan is actually found in a number of food sources, right? I mean, it's an amino acid. You know, I wouldn't recommend switching to like an all-turkey diet, like to treat your depression or something. Thinking that's going to increase your serotonin levels.
That's why you're so sad.
I know, right? You were really excited about that.
I was hyper.
All right. So then you take 5-HTP, and hey, who remembers this? Aromatic amino acid decarboxylase.
I wrote it down.
You wrote it down, right? We specifically mentioned AADC when we were talking about the synthesis pathway for dopamine, right? And remember, all of these guys are kind of in a big group of monoamines together. That takes 5-HTP and turns it into 5-HT, which is serotonin. So we'll abbreviate it 5-HT if we need to. So you've got tryptophan, 5-HTP, 5-HT. Not a big deal. You're just making some changes, right? There are sort of two versions of that tryptophan hydroxylase gene. Some of them are in neurons that make serotonin. That makes sense, right, Jason? Is where we should put that. Some of them are out in the gut and out in melatonin secreting cells in the pineal gland. Remember, melatonin is that stuff some people take to go to sleep. We decided you shouldn't do that, right? We thought that was a smart thing. Right. So it's like this and not like that, right?
I saw they're selling melatonin inhalers at the counter of Sheets now.
Melatonin inhalers.
Inhalers, yeah.
Wow, that's exactly what I want a truck driver to have.
So right next to the caffeine inhalers.
Oh.
So that way you can go to sleep after.
Just like even yourself out, right? Why don't people just stick to alcohol and cocaine? I mean, that was a good, that worked. I mean, if you gotta dial yourself in, you know, we don't need these fancy inhalers. Back in my day, alcoholics just used cocaine to make sure they were up and moving. Fancy kids. Was that next to the wine by the glass at Sheets? Yes. So I'm going to tell you something, folks. I'm not really a wine drinker myself. Don't buy wine from a gas station. I mean, it's just not worth your money, right? Especially if it comes in a single
It
serve.
was on Shark Tank.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
It was on Shark Tank.
I saw it.
Wow. I sort of had some idea those folks. Well, wow.
Well, there's obviously a need for it.
I wouldn't say a need for it. I would say a market.
A demand, yeah.
Demand, we'll go with that. There's not a need for glass by the wine at the gas station. I mean, it's like what are you going to do? Get your, like, you know, made-to-order BMT and get a glass of wine and go out to the picnic table at Sheets?
You never know.
That's a good thing. I guess, right? I don't know.
Perfect elements all together.
Watch the traffic drive by.
There's far more interesting things at Sheets than traffic.
There are. I got really mad, speaking of Sheets, I got really mad the other day. I had to go up to the mall to return some curtains that didn't work. And so I drive, this is a Sheets store, so I drive up to Sheets because I need gas too. And I'm like almost out of gas by the time I get there because I don't usually plan ahead on these things. But the gas light came on, so I pulled into the Sheets up by the mall. And I try to like swipe my card and it tells me I have to go inside to pay. And I'm like, what are these people don't trust me? Like I use my card all the time, but it was like a new credit card, right? So like I just got it and I thought, well, this must be what it is, right? So Cassie, I go in. I get in line, I was like, hey, I need to buy some gas on pump 10. I'm like, showing my card and they're like, oh, credit cards don't work. So what are you talking about? The power had gone out apparently and just came back on. And I'm like, they're like, well, you have to pay cash. I'm like, I never have cash, right? I accidentally had $10 on me. So it was like the first time since I was in high school, I bought like $10 worth of gas, right? And not just like swipe my card and fill it up and not think about it. Thankfully I had that because I had to push my car home. So then, like, not really thinking, I drive on over to the mall and I try to go into like the home goods store. The door's locked because the power was out and they couldn't take credit cards. So they couldn't make any sales. So I had to go back another day. Like twice I had to go. This is really disappointing.
I think that's a good problem to have to go to Home Goods twice. Personally.
Actually, you know, if you think about this, I had to go 3 times. Well, I didn't go the first time. I didn't buy the curtains. My wife bought the curtains. Or I would have had to make 3 trips. Like the first one to buy the curtains, and 2 attempts to return.
That's a good time.
Yeah.
I love Home Goods.
Again, this conversion from tryptophan to 5-HTP is that rate limiting step. That's that tryptophan hydroxylase. This should be a story that sounds familiar to you, right, Kyle? Because we talked about tyrosine hydroxylase. Not a big deal. We can give animals big doses of tryptophan or 5-HT, which can stimulate that serotonin, right? So there you go, Olivia. You're not out there, right? Like just like eating a bunch of turkey to boost your serotonin levels. Like, boy, I think about this though, and I think about, like, why are there so many arguments at Thanksgiving? Like, families get together, they should eat the turkey before they show up. So when they get there, they're already just chilled out a little bit, right?
The wine in the glass is for it.
Put the wine, it's with the wine, stop off at Sheetz on your way in, right? Get everybody a glass of wine. They'll get you a little cup holder carried out. Beverage. So tryptophan, if you're going to get this from your diet, right, so you got to think about tryptophan, that ratio to the other amino acids. Now, here's the deal. Other amino acids are going to be competing for tryptophan, with tryptophan to get across that blood-brain barrier, right? Okay. So here you go. You eat some tryptophan. It's going to try to slip in. Other amino acids are also going to be in there that can block that. We want to get tryptophan into the brain so we can make 5-HT, not a big deal.
What's the difference between tryptophan and L-tryptophan?
It's a very sort of, it's a biochemical, it's related to the like orientation of the molecule. Yeah, sometimes that's going to be important to you, but sometimes it's not. The other one's going to be like R-tryptophan, which you're not going to see, right? L-tryptophan is, and if somebody just says tryptophan, they're referring to L-tryptophan because that's the version that you can use biologically. It's just related to the orientation of the molecules. So if you were to take this molecule and kind of like flip it around in the other direction, not just like take the molecule and flip it over, but like flip the orientation of some of the atoms, right, and the way it's bending, then it's going to be the same molecule but different, and it's not going to have this, it's not going to have the same like biomechanical properties.
So like they sell supplements of like L-tryptophan and 5-HTP together.
Yeah.
To like, you know, create more serotonin. Is that like a wise choice to treat depression?
I would always recommend you go to a medical professional, right? So that's going to be like my first recommendation, right? And that includes you guys. I count you as medical professionals. I mean, not now, but when you finish, you will be, right? Because you're dealing with a medical issue when you help, right? And so I think you should really think about yourselves that way. I wish, remember that OHEB guy? Yeah. That will definitely increase your serotonin levels, right? I'm not saying it won't help your depression, right? Part of the problem is it's not going to be monitored by a medical professional, right? So if you're taking that, and you have to worry about, like, are you causing side effects? Are you taking something that's a placebo? You're running the risk of side effects. So there are a whole host of things that I would typically say, you know, getting a medical professional involved are going to help. But at the same time, I mean, an SSRI is just going to increase your serotonin level, right? The amount of serotonin.
That's because it's preventing the reuptake, so like.
It's a different process, yeah.
Yeah, but if, what am I trying to get at? Like, will it matter if you have more synthesis of serotonin if the problem is in the reuptake process?
Not really. I mean, the problem, you know, if you think about the problem being in the reuptake process, that's just a convenient place for us to block it.
Okay.
That's all. A convenient place might be for us to make, I mean, if you think about L-DOPA, right? That was a convenient place for us to push you to make more dopamine. It's a convenient target. And that's all we're looking for in these synthesis pathways and release pathways is where is a convenient target? And if blocking reuptake is a convenient target for us to increase the amount of serotonin available at the synapse, that's great. If it's in this production pathway, that's great too, right? It doesn't really matter. And drugs can work different ways. Now, there may be times where, so you could think about an individual who doesn't have a high level of reuptake inhibitors or reuptake serotonin transporters. And if you're kind of low on the serotonin transporter side, a reuptake inhibitor is not going to help you because you don't have that many, you're not really doing that much reuptake anyway, so blocking it's not going to help you. In that case, we would really want to target synthesis, right? And that's where where a genetic profile would tell us that, right? Are these people high transporter producers, low transporter producers? You know, where are they on that scale? And so that's why we would want a couple attack points to work on that. On the flip side, if you were someone who had, you know, if you had some issue with your, you know, we were thinking about that VMAT, right? That vesicle transporter. If you were short on the vesicle transporter, affecting the synthesis pathway is not going to help you because you're not going to be able to necessarily package that any better. So in that case, you're definitely going to want to attack the reuptake process, right? So it can definitely help. It'll definitely make a difference if you're, you know, increasing your serotonin levels enough. Could be effective. We can give it to those mothers that Cassie's going to have, right, to see if that helps them with their kids. I don't know. But yeah, so you do see a lot of the L-tryptophan 5-HTP supplements. Do not take those with some other serotonin agonist. Okay, that's when you get in some real trouble. You start taking two things that affect serotonin or really any system, then you can get, I don't know if I have a slide on serotonin syndrome in here. Thought I did. Let's see. Great, we get to talk about irritable bowel syndrome. That's going to be fun. How did Google know that's what I wanted to do? I think we can typically trust the Mayo Clinic, right? So when you take these drugs, it'll jack up your serotonin levels. You got to worry about things like agitation, restlessness, confusion, heart rate and blood pressure is going to go up. Pupils are going to dilate. So far, we've not really got anything too serious. Now we're getting into some things: loss of muscle coordination, muscle rigidity, right? You'll end up with some diarrhea, headaches. The heavy sweating is not such a big deal. Can cause some serious problems like high fever, seizures. Your heartbeat can get all screwed up, and you can eventually lose consciousness. So if you're taking, these are things that affect, these are like over the counter, these aren't over the counter, these are like prescribed drugs that can, well, I guess LSD is not typically prescribed. Although, you guys have been reading about this like microdosing LSD business. I haven't read much about that, but that's on my radar.
I've been listening to, what's it called? How to Change Your Mind by Dr. Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
About, it's just a psychiatric journal basically of LSD's use in psychotherapy.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting when we talk about that. Here you go. Here are the herbal supplements. St. John's wort, ginseng, and nutmeg. So if you're on an SSRI, I don't know if you guys use a lot of nutmeg. Anybody use a lot of nutmeg? Sometimes I put a little nutmeg in my mashed potatoes. Trust me, it's good. It's a secret ingredient.
So
So
how
there
do
you
they test for serotonin syndrome? Like, what do they do to figure out that's what it is and not something else that
Well,
diarrhea?
Yeah, so diarrhea alone is probably not gonna, like you come into your doctor and you go, hey, I got the squirts. The first thing they're gonna do is go, serotonin syndrome. That's probably not what you're gonna do, Cassie. They're gonna go, let's see what else is going on, right? Although, that could be, they'll look for these other symptoms, right? Some of the more serious ones. Although diarrhea can be very serious, I understand that, right? The other thing that they will do is they will go, hey, what drugs are you taking? And when you go, wow, man, I am on Prozac, and you know I've been taking this over-the-counter stuff called St. John's wort, then they'll go, I bet that's the old serotonin syndrome, right? And so they'll look at what medications and over-the-counter things you're taking as well.
Do they do like a blood test or anything to confirm that? Or is it just kind of like, oh, we're going to start here first because of these medicines you're on, and you just stop taking them?
Yeah. Typically, it's going to be rapid, right? It's not going to be like just all of a sudden one day you're like, whoa, I'm really confused and I have diarrhea. It usually is going to happen not long after you take your dose or you increase your dose, right? So if you take it now and then like 3 days from now you get diarrhea, it's probably not it. Okay? But it can be fatal. So this is something serious. I mean, especially like the seizures and so forth. So, and typically you would see this, again, like right after you've started a new dose or a new drug, right? You're not going to see it. You know, if you've been taking Celexa for a year and a half and your doses remain constant, you're probably not all of a sudden going to develop serotonin syndrome. Now, if you're taking Celexa and then you decide, I need to take some Mucinex, and a couple hours later you start having some problems, you know, you might be dealing with that. Most people don't think about these cough and cold medications that can cause these problems.
Or Tylenol.
Huh?
Tylenol, codeine.
A lot of it's the opioid business causes the interactions there and the problems. Yep. And then our fun MAOIs are always on the list. You should never take those with any other drug or eat anything, just bread and water. That's why they don't prescribe those that much. So there you go. That's a serotonin story. It was a fun story, right? Everybody loves diarrhea. No, nobody's going to say, yeah. All right, let's see what else we got. You guys, I mean, insulin will stimulate the uptake of amino acids except tryptophan. If you eat a low protein, high carb diet, that'll actually, cause you some, it'll change that ratio a bit, and it'll increase the serotonin production. That's the problem there, Olivia, with that all turkey diet. I wouldn't say an all turkey diet is a low protein, high carb diet, right? I would sort of think of that being the high protein, low carb diet. And so I don't know if massively increasing the turkey in your diet is going to really have a big effect your serotonin.
Turkey sandwiches.
Turkey sandwiches. Now we're getting somewhere, right? Yeah. So there you go. Oh, this is going to do it again. What's the problem with this computer locking up on me all the time?
Because you didn't give it a break.
Well, it doesn't have a bladder. It doesn't need a break. You guys don't need a break either. You shouldn't drink water before you come to class.
It's good for you, supposedly.
Supposedly. Yeah, I think we can say water's good. I mean,
Can't turn on anything in here.
Well,
all right.
We talked about American water.
this is not. I hope not. Again, you never know.
We'll try this again. So serotonin syndrome, that was exciting, right?
Did you read that last week or maybe the week before, the FDA approved psilocybin mushrooms in a study for treating treatment-resistant depression?
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
It's pretty landmark.
Yeah, it is. That's cool. We'll talk about fun stuff like that. Maybe one day we should listen to the radio. I was excited about it. No, there's the Boston University Seminary study. I think it was Boston University, where they gave these guys like who were studying to be priests, like psychedelic. Like half of them they gave psychedelics, and the other half they didn't. What was interesting about it is 9 of the 10 guys who took the psychedelic ended up going into like the clergy. 0 of 10 who didn't get the drug during this like Easter service didn't go into the. It was kind of interesting, sort of thing. One of the main side effects, therapeutic effects. You don't want to call it a therapeutic effect, I guess. One of the main effects of like your hallucinogenics, your psychedelics, is like a religious experience, right? You think like. That's why many of the drugs that are in that class are used in religious ceremonies, right? That's why that's not really I guess a serotonin story so much. I mean, sort of is, but there you go. A lot of those are actually serotonergics, so they actually affect the serotonin system. That's why they're not addictive, because they don't activate that VTA to nucleus accumbens dopamine pathway, right? So that's kind of cool. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. You can actually do like tryptophan depletion kind of things, tryptophan loading. We don't really need to think about this too much. They do this sort of experimentally to assess the role of serotonin in mood and cognition. They'll do this with animals. They'll give them a diet that will increase the uptake of tryptophan or decrease the uptake of tryptophan, and then they can sort of start altering other pathways and other drugs and kind of affect things. So, not a big deal. Clinical depression, you might see some folks with depression, right? Never, right? A lot of these are going to be SSRIs. Again, we use that. This time we used VMAT2. It's a slightly different thing, but remember we talked about blocking VMAT. Again, if your problem is that you're not able to store serotonin, blocking reuptake, it's going to be, you have to think about where your problem is. Why don't you have enough serotonin at the synapse? Or why don't you have enough effective serotonin at the synapse? There'd be a variety of reasons. You may not have enough serotonin receptors. So you need to try to think about where your target's going to be. We're getting better. There are more drugs that can affect different places and different paths. So not a big deal. 19 minutes, you think we can get through this? Serotonin release. It is stimulated by amphetamine, so there you go. That's something. Didn't know that before. What about MDMA? Anybody familiar with MDMA? Nobody's gonna like, yeah, all the time. A vial of that at home. I don't know if it comes in
Came
vials.
in a vial.
I
I was like, oh, it comes in a vial.
I assume all drugs come in vials in some, right?
Just picturing Emperor's New Groove.
When I used to buy drugs, they came in vials. That's how we got them from like scientific supply companies, was vials. Just to let you know, Jason, when I was buying drugs, how I bought them. I bought them with a DEA license. Yeah.
Is it cheaper or more expensive to do
With a
that
DEA
way?
license? It's more, I would say it's cheaper because you don't have to pay fines or go to jail.
I mean, less market.
Yeah, I think it depends on the drug. What I'm definitely more confident when I use a DEA license to buy a drug that I'm actually getting like the drug I'm paying for, right? So there's no chance of me getting like any kind of like substance that's been cut into it, right? So I'm definitely, if I'm buying cocaine, then I'm definitely getting cocaine, right? I'm not getting cocaine plus something else that's going to kill me.
The best part about this is that these conversations are on YouTube. Like,
Yeah.
that's what makes it.
I mean, what's somebody going to do? They're like, this guy used to buy drugs. Well, yeah, I did used to buy drugs. I mean, I did this, right? All the time. I would just I used to buy ketamine by the case. Come in like a case of bottles. And you get the ketamine out, give it to an animal, write down how much you gave it, sign off on that. So when the DEA shows up, they say, okay, that's where your ketamine went.
You're scraping some off the top.
Yeah, no, you don't do that. Because they will check you. They really will. And they'll come and they'll get the vials out. And they will estimate how much is left in like, if it's a new vial, and they'll say like 50 mils, right? So you know like 50 mils are in that, the seal is still on it. If the seal's removed, and you've got a drug log that indicates there are like 30 mils left in that bottle, they'll figure it out. Like they will like estimate how much is in there, and if it's not close, you're in some trouble.
Why would you buy it by the case? That's a lot.
You need a lot of
That
it.
feels like a lot for
For
mice.
animals.
If you're doing a lot of work, I mean,
It's not like a
it's not like
case
a
of
case.
water. Like it's
It's
like
like
a.
a case.
Okay.
You know, it's like 6 bottles.
Okay.
Picturing gallons.
It's like 650 mil bottles. You know?
Like those little pop cans they make now. Like 6 of those is what I picture. Just a little.
Yeah, I'm
little
not even.
6-pack.
I'm not even getting like half a liter of ketamine. You know. I mean, and you want to buy it in the individual. You don't want to buy it in like a big container because it's going to get contaminated, and that's bad. So there you go. I've got a great ketamine supplier if you need one. So there you go. It's going to affect. So hey, this is what's interesting. Here's these different drugs, right? And you can see that their shapes are kind of similar. If their shapes are similar, they're going to do the same thing, right? I told you about the time I gave rat ecstasy, right? That was interesting. We gave them LSD as well. We had LSD in that lab, cocaine, ecstasy.
Oh, that's when you're social.
Yeah, it makes them less social,
Yeah.
like as adults. So that's kind of interesting. This is like they used to give people ecstasy, right? I mean, if you come in, you're a little lethargic, you're depressed, nothing picks you up like a shot of MDMA, right? I mean, really, I mean.
It's coming back for
Yeah.
PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not. I mean, we think it's kind of ridiculous because you guys hear like all the negative things about ecstasy, right? But there are positive things, right? And you should really think about that. And I think that's a real problem. And I think this is something I want you to think about as like, not obviously as like a clinician, maybe, but just as a thinking person, which I assume a few of you are. A drug's just a drug, right? I mean, it's all an external substance you're putting in your body that mimics an internal substance that's going to have some biological effect, right? What makes what makes Prozac acceptable but not LSD, right? I mean, what is that? What's the connotation? You ever think about that? I mean, what is the thing that makes that acceptable and not acceptable? If you think about,
Nixon.
huh?
Nixon.
Nixon, yeah, I mean, there you go. That's a good, it's politics, right? I mean, it's in public perception. I mean, drugs are drugs. It doesn't matter what drug you're taking. It's causing a change to your body. If you want to think about what is a drug that is, you know, one of the, I mean, how many of you know someone who's been on lithium? Is that not one of the most powerful drugs somebody, if you want to think about the changes it makes in your behavior, right? I mean, lithium is like a beast, right? But yet, you know, like, well, I mean, you probably shouldn't be smoking marijuana because that might make you a little hungry, maybe a little paranoid. You know, maybe you shouldn't operate a vehicle. You shouldn't operate a vehicle while you're probably on lithium either. That's just a side story there. You know, most of these drugs that alter your brain function, you probably should not like operate heavy machinery, and a car is heavy machinery. Bicycles are okay. They're not heavy
Like
machinery.
right out in the middle of the road or something.
That's on you, right? You're not going to kill somebody riding a bicycle into it.
What are you talking
It's a
about?
little safer for the rest of us. So there you go. Yeah, you don't really need to know that. I already told you about that. Here you go, Montana, just for you right there. There's a PTSD reference, yeah. So low doses. You know, we're not giving people like massive doses of ecstasy. We're not going to drink a gallon of ecstasy and see what happens. You probably feel better. Again, it's a lot of it's dosing, right? All right, here's this guy, that 5-HT transporter, or SERT. That's the serotonin reuptake transporter. Not a big deal. This is where things like Prozac, or you know, fluoxetine is the same thing, will block that reuptake inhibitor. We've talked about that. Not a big deal. You guys have a handle on this, right? Cocaine and ecstasy both block SERT, right? But they're not necessarily selective. This is one of the problems, you know, like using, I mean, cocaine had, you know, medical uses at one time, right? I mean, that, you know, think about that. Your favorite detective, Sherlock Holmes, was a cocaine addict. Anybody Sherlock Holmes fans? You got like 1.5 head nods. Not the Robert Downey Jr. version.
Or like.
Although that's pretty applicable, right?
Like
There,
you-
see? Jesus. You're like the anchor over here. I don't know about Benedict Cumberbatch if he's on cocaine. I'm going to assume he's not. Other things, perhaps. He's not animated enough for me to think he's on a psychostimulant. You know, if you said he's, you know, a chronic marijuana user, then I might believe that. I'm not going to believe he's always on cocaine. That's just my, you know, his personality's a little slower. Robert Downey Jr., different story.
It's like known, right?
What?
Like that's like a known thing. Though.
Yeah,
Like, he's talked about that.
Yeah, not anymore, I think.
Arrested.
Yeah, he's been clean for some time, I do believe, right?
Yeah.
But I'm talking about like the actual like, yeah, the books, right? Like that was on paper. You guys have seen them. So the problem with like these drugs is they also affect dopamine transporters, right? So they can affect dopamine levels as well. So here's a mouse. We've knocked out its serotonin transporter. Caused some problems, don't worry about it. 5-HT is broken down by monoamine oxidase type A. There's like an A version. There are other versions, don't worry about it, it's MAO. And you get this stuff out. You can actually measure, so Kristen, this is just for you, nobody else. You can measure serotonergic levels by looking at 5-HIAA, it's that metabolite. Again, it's not giving you a real-time estimate, right? But it will give you sort of an overall estimate of the level of activity. And if you were looking at broader sort of changes in behavior or changes in the environment or drugs or something, you can measure that over some time by looking at those levels. Let's see. here are a bunch of your serotonergic sort of starting points, and there's where it all goes. You need to know that. In particular, goes to cortex. That's hippocampus. That's pretty, right? I thought it was pretty good. I'm not going to ask you about this too much, about sleeping. If you give folks serotonin agonist, they do become sleepy, right? That's one of the side effects of SSRIs is sleepiness, right? I mean, you guys probably know that. It's a pretty common side effect. Don't worry too much about this stuff. Again, we have receptor subtypes, right? Here's 1A. These guys are in places like the hippocampus, the amygdala. Those are important places for like fear development, right? So if you've got somebody who has an anxiety problem, somebody who has PTSD, targeting that 1A type receptor subtype out in the amygdala, that might be actually a pretty good target, right? Good therapeutic target there. So you can kind of take a look, see what's going on here. They actually open potassium channels. When they open potassium channels, those positive ions leak out, making the inside of the cell more negative, which will reduce the likelihood it's going to fire an action potential. Right? So it's going to kind of calm that guy down a little bit. All kinds of receptor, 5-HT1A receptor agonists. You guys have heard of a bunch of these. Type 5-HT2A receptors, those are out in cortex. We've got that sort of second messenger system going on. Not a big deal. You don't really have to worry about too much there. Probably haven't heard of these drugs. Let's see. A lot of these drugs are hallucinogenic. We've already talked a little bit about LSD and its ability to cause hallucinations and other things. It works on that 5-HT2A receptor, right? This is why we're not really using that as a therapeutic target, right? Because we don't want to induce hallucinations, right? I mean, that's, if we're trying to treat someone for depression, right? Although activating those receptor subtypes can help, we still activate it some with these other drugs. You guys have heard of these. They also are, they block those receptors. We can treat schizophrenia with these as well because they actually have some dopamine activity. Not a big deal. Let's see. Not too worried about pain. Transdermal ionophoresis. I don't think you need to know about that. Cancer chemotherapy. I already talked about measuring 5-HIAA. Again, this is important to really look at these polymorphisms in the genes for your serotonin reuptake transporter, because that will let you know whether or not the SSRIs or the the agonist or antagonist that you're using are actually going to be effective, right? Based on what type of subtype profile you have, whether or not your transporter actually works. You can find things that do or do not work. Okay. There are a number of drugs and what they do, nothing to worry about. Knockouts, same story you're getting everywhere else. Let's see. Serotonin plays a role in aggression, right? So low levels of serotonin typically are associated with higher levels of aggressive behavior, right? So how many of you work at a daycare? Get aggressive kids, just throw them slices of turkey? With a little bit of bread, right, Olivia? Because we got to have those carbs in there to balance that out, okay? We could get into this nice story about aggression, but we don't really have time for that. Maybe Montana could talk to you guys about this at a later time, right? Tell them all about different types of aggressive behaviors. Basic idea, if you got low levels of serotonin, you're going to have high levels of aggression. Not really a big deal. Here we go, we gave somebody fluoxetine. Guess what? They became less aggressive than folks who got a placebo. It's not surprising. I like to think about serotonin and sleep as well. You know, nobody's gone to sleep aggressively, right? So, you know, you just, and then you're right out of it. So that's, you can kind of link those two things together, right, in your minds. Thermoregulation, that's an issue. We don't have to think about this. These are just some of the side effects. Hey, what about that SIDS thing? I mean, that's something. Sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. Doesn't sound fun. Hey, remember when we just talked about like 1A and 2A? It goes all the way up to like 6. Tons of subtype, right? This is why you have so many sort of broad effects of serotonin. I mean, it's related to hunger and eating, right? There's like Fenfluramine. This was used to treat obesity. There was a real problem with that because it like screwed up your heart valves. Yeah, and so that's probably not something you want to do. So when it starts messing around with your heart valves, you go, maybe I'll just try something else. So I don't really give that anymore. What about buspirone? Well, you guys ever treat somebody with anxiety? You guys ever seen somebody with anxiety? They'll use SSRIs for that as well. This is going to work on the 5-HT1A receptor. A lot of times they'll give you partial agonists. Okay, this is when we want to give you a little boost, but not a big shove, right? Just want to give you a nudge. So we'll give you that partial agonist, increase the activity of serotonin a little bit. Not so much you're maybe going to get those side effects, but just a little bit to give you a little improvement there in your mood behavior, right?
I thought they were calling it Boost Bar for the first few times I heard it, and it was in the prison, and I was like, are they giving them some sort of granola bar for like their anxiety problems? Like, I don't understand. And then I saw it wrote out, and I was like, just kidding, not a granola bar.
No, it's not.
It's not, well, the way that they were saying it so many times, it sounded like Boost Bar, and I was like, what's that? Yeah.
Well,
Never know.
You don't, right? And you know, there you go. You learned something. So here it is.
You never know.
Do you still work in the prison?
I just started. That's why I didn't know what Boost Bar was.
Okay. Now you know. I will tell you this, like in prisons, they will give everybody the same drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cheap and easy.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can just, no, seriously. So you're not going to get, and this is sort of an interesting thing for you to consider, you're not in a prison system going to get a lot of variety.
So if it doesn't work, they're just like, meh.
They give them a whole combination of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like an ingredient list.
Whatever. All right, well, I guess, guys, that's like time. You guys can read the rest of this stuff, I assume.